Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. This is the program Master of Science in Bioethics, and course is the beginning of life bioethics or bioethical issues at the beginning of human life. So, Dayan, good morning. Hope you can.
Morning, Father. Good morning, everyone.
Let me turn our microphone on here, our speaker. Okay. Give us a little good morning, see if I can hear you.
Let's see. Good morning. Can you hear me?
No, not yet.
Not yet?
Maybe your speaker.
Let's see.
Our speaker is on.
Mine is on too. Good morning.
Okay. Well, you can hear us.
Yes.
If you have a question, wave or call me on the cell, okay? Because for some reason I cannot hear you.
Okay. Very good.
Mic. Okay. And the mic here is working, yes. Okay, before we go into today's lecture, which is essentially on natural family planning, I want to talk about next week, next Saturday, which is the conference on women's health. It's a seminar on women's health and focusing on reproductive health as a sign of the health of a woman, okay? And thanks be to God, it's being done here at St. Thomas University. It will be at the gym, what we call the Fernandez Center. And it coincides with this lecture because the seminar is actually from 9 a.m. till 3:30 p.m. You don't have to stay until the afternoon, but at least I'm going to ask you to please come for the morning sessions, 9 to 12 or 12:30, whatever time we break for lunch, okay? And it's going to be basically a reiteration of today's lecture on natural family planning, but one particular model, which is the Creighton model from Creighton University, all right? And it's called NAPRO technology, NAPRO for Natural Procreation Technologies. And there's a doctor, Dr. Trout or something like that. He's coming, he's giving a talk, and then there's some side talks, also breakout sessions. I think they're after lunch. At any rate, the main talk is for the general audience, and I've already registered all of you into it. Okay, so that's all done, pre-registration. We do need to get a little earlier because, like I said, it starts at 9 instead of 9:15, and it's going to be in the gym instead of here. So as you drive through the gateway, then the first little curve, make a right. You'll see it is very prominent. Make a right turn, the first option that you have, which is maybe half a block away from the gate. And you'll see the gym. It's a large structure. You can't miss it really. It'll be at the end of that little side road on the right-hand side instead of continuing toward this building, okay? I don't know, Father Dayan, it's probably impossible for you. If perhaps you could make it, if you want to come over Friday evening, I'd be happy to host you at Immaculate Conception. And sorry for the short notice, but maybe for the future we can do that. If you can carve it out someday that you can have the Saturday free. You can possibly come over Friday afternoon or Friday evening, stay at Immaculate and leave Saturday afternoon, all right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Most likely it will be recorded. I don't know if it's going to be videoed, but maybe at least audio recorded. So for those who cannot attend live, I'll have that posting as soon as I'm able to get it after the seminar sometime. But like I say, it's kind of a reiteration of today's lecture. But it's providential that it's happening here on campus. I'm also involved in some of the panels, but then I have to leave around 1 o'clock because I have confessions in the afternoon at the cathedral. So I cannot stay for the whole thing either. If you all can stay for the whole thing until 3:30, lunch is included and it's already paid for, so you're welcome to stay for the whole event if you can, all right? In the afternoon, mostly there will be panel discussions and opportunity to ask questions or make comments. Okay, so that's next Saturday, again, beginning at 9, so please try to be here early enough. and it goes all the way until 3:30. If you can at least stay until noon for the main talks, and then the break, the lunch break. Anything about that? Questions, comments? No? Very good. All right, what else? Then, so next Saturday we'll end this first course on the bioethical issues at the beginning of human life. And in 2 Saturdays, we're starting the second course, okay, which is bioethical issues at the end of human life. It happens that this in 2 Saturdays, I also have a commitment. I'm involved in the prison ministry, and we're doing that Saturday. We'll be in prison all day. So far, they've let me out every time I go. So we just be for that one Saturday, okay? But it means that we will not have lecture here live, but I will send you the link to the recording, because I will start the end-of-life issues, and we only have about 7 or 8 sessions, and I cannot afford to miss out. So I'll send it to you. It will be mostly the biological grounding of the bioethical issues. You know, the way I'm doing bioethics, which is, in my opinion, the best way to do it really, is to set out first the biological issues, the biological facts and understanding of the particular topic that we're talking about, and then do the ethical analysis based on the biological facts, okay? So that's why we say it's evidence-based, and it's also based on natural law. For example, the fact of sexual reproduction and fertilization and the end result of the zygote, which is the beginning of the new individual, etc. Once we establish that biological fact, then we can do the bioethical analysis of any kind of aggression or manipulation or insult. That's a clinical term, an insult on the human embryo, because we have established the basic biological fact on when life begins, individual human life, okay? So we'll do the same for the end of human life. The one big difference, just in anticipation, and since I'm not gonna be here live, is that in contrast with the beginning of life, where we begin with how many cells? It's a no-brainer. It should be an automatic response in your sleep. 1 cell, called the zygote, okay? Single cell. We all start that way. Whales, the largest animals on earth, start that way, all right? And the smallest and the largest animal that reproduces sexually, and plants, all begin the new individual with 1 cell. So in contrast to that, at the end of life, how many cells do we have? Trillions, okay? That's 10 to the 9, 10 to the 12, actually, 10 to the 12. Minimally trillions of cells. And you know what? They don't all die at the same time. Is that they will definitely not die at the same time. And they can be toward the end of life, at the end of life, okay? For the human, for the non-human. With trillions and trillions of cells, it is logical, if it is obvious, that between the death of the first cell and the death of the last cell in our bodies, it could be hours, days, weeks, and maybe even months between the death of the first cell and the death of the last cell of the trillions and trillions of cells that form our body. Okay, and so we have to deal with the death process. Death then becomes a process which could be much longer than fertilization, which typically can be between 10 minutes and 24 hours. Okay, or syngamy, which will be the second 24 hours. Okay, so from that perspective alone, death and the determination of death and the bioethical issues associated with death may be more complicated and more subtle than the beginning of life issues. And therefore, at the end of the day, we have to go case by case. Is this patient dying actively? You know, has the death process begun? And that's a clinical and also a bioethical question that allows us to resolve. If this patient is dying, then extraordinary means don't really obligate, but ordinary means of life support do obligate. So I just gave you in 2 minutes the summary of the whole course there, okay? We'll get into the details in the weeks to come. So the first lecture is going to be establishing what are vital organs and so forth, and the biology of life toward the end. Okay, anything else about that? Any questions, comments? John, please.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the schedule. So
Yep.
The first online lecture is going to be March 3rd or the 10th.
Right, okay, so let's look at that. March 3rd, yes. March 3rd will be online, so do not come to class on March 3rd. That's in 2 Saturdays. Just look for emails that I'll send you. Okay, probably within this week.
Is that when we're back in class?
And then on the 10th, yes, we'll be back. Now, the other thing about the 10th is that spring break for undergrads here at St. Thomas University is from Monday night, March 5 to Friday, March 9. And now it's providential. It works in my favor anyway, that the university keeps forgetting that I teach on Saturdays. And so the spring break is Monday through Friday as on the schedule, which means that March 10 we have class. We're not on break officially, okay? So that's what we're gonna do there. But March 10, yes? Yes, and we're back to here, yes. Mm-hmm. So March 10, we're back here. And March 17, which happens to be St. Patrick's Day. And then March 24, and March 31st, April 7, April 14, April 21st.
April 7th.
Yes, maybe, so let's see, we have to see where, no, Holy Saturday we will not meet. Let's see.
The week before, I think.
Yes, sorry. So March 31st, we have no class. That's Good Friday. I'm sorry, that's Holy Saturday. So that's Holy Week. It's the, well, it's actually the 30th, right?
March 17th?
So March 31st, we will not meet because that's,
So we'll meet on March 7th.
we meet, yeah, March.
April 7th.
Okay, so March 31st, no. April 7, yes.
April.
Yes, and April
7.
14, yes. All of April,
I
21,
don't want to miss that one, Bob.
24. Okay, well, watch the video.
Yeah.
Saturday, April 28th, yes. Okay. We'll see about May 5th. Technically, the graduation is May 4th. So potentially, we'll see how far we get. We may or may not meet May 5th, okay? Then there'll be a little break and we'll start the summer sessions, which probably within a month, more or less, those courses should be posted. So you can start registering there, okay? Okay, so, yep, any other questions? No? Good, welcome, all right. So, hopefully not forgetting anything else. Always remember, if you have questions or comments, you can call me, email me, all right, and we'll go from there. So let me distribute out some handout. I sent the handout last night by email. So if we can pass it around, please. Thank you. And also have some homework to return at the break. This one. Okay. So we're going to look at mostly natural family planning today as the healthy alternative to artificial contraception or direct sterilization. And also toward the end, probably after the break, we'll look at 3 parent embryos and chimeras, which are further interventions on human life at the beginning, all right? And we'll do the First, the biological and then the bioethical analysis of 3 parent embryos and chimeras. Okay, so if there are no further questions, we'll move forward. NFP is, like I'm saying, the healthy alternative to artificial contraception. And remember, the statistics for contraception or direct sterilization is 99%, approximately, with a lot of discipline. In other words, with a perfect performance or perfect behavior, meaning taking the pill every day and so forth, or using whatever other artificial means is being used. And now NFP has also been given a high, around from 97 to 99% more or less effectiveness, again, if used very disciplined, very conscientiously. Okay, so it has about the same statistical effectiveness, but both methods require discipline one way or another. And there's even a report from the AMA. I'm going to try to dig it up. The AMA is the American Medical Association, and the journal is JAMA, J-A-M-A, the Journal of the American Medical Association. There was an article there a few years back where clinically this statistic was corroborated as an effective means for either trying to achieve conception or trying to avoid conception, right? And that was by the AMA. So it has that clinical validity that they validated NFP as an alternative method of family planning, either to try to have children or to try to avoid children. So from that perspective, it's a good thing to have because, again, it's, first of all, it's much cheaper than the artificial stuff. It doesn't have to deal with hormones or any kind of artificial blockage or getting in the way of the marital act. And keep in mind that there's also always that psychological dimension, whereas all these methods and means, of course, whether artificial or natural, start primarily at the physical level. They have a psychological and a spiritual implication, right? Because we're not just robots. It's not just robots that are performing that intercourse. It's actual human beings. Okay, so basically for NFP, we can look at, they are symptoms that are pre-ovulatory symptoms. In other words, these are symptoms of the woman's body that gear up toward ovulation. And there are specific physiological symptoms of her body whereby she can detect these changes that are leading up to ovulation or during the actual time of ovulation, which on average is 24 hours out of 1 day out of the 28-day cycle. Because remember, I said it's a lunar cycle. It actually has to do with the water shift in the body originally as it was coming up in evolution, if you will. These symptoms, these physiological symptoms can be subdivided into 2 main categories, all right? They are the primary symptoms and the secondary symptoms. And there are at least 3 primary symptoms and 7 secondary symptoms, at least, that can tell a woman that she is ovulating if she is attentive to these symptoms. Okay, now, as many things in nature, there's a range of intensity of these symptoms, and the range is typically a normal distribution, right? A Gaussian curve, meaning that for some women, these symptoms, some of these symptoms are extreme and others are extremely mild. And most women are somewhere in between for each one of the 10 symptoms. So most of these 10 symptoms follow a Gaussian distribution individually. So we're talking about the complexity of it, putting it all together into one big question and one big answer. Am I ovulating? When am I ovulating? And that is cycle per cycle, okay? So Because we go into a statistical model, then what makes the statistics robust? In general, what makes a statistic robust? What do I mean by that? That the confidence level is a large confidence level or narrow margin of error. Setting you up a little bit also for the statistics course in the summer. What makes a statistics robust?
When you get the same, in this case, symptoms every single cycle.
Exactly. The number of trials in whatever. So what makes it the sample size, because you cannot sample the whole population, right? You always need a sample of the population. And the larger that sample is, the more robust the stats, right? So basically the number of trials, the number of cases, and exactly. And therefore, as many times as each woman is detecting these symptoms month by month and charting it and so forth, then that statistic becomes more and more robust, and that translates really, actually, existentially into confidence. She is more and more confident to say, I am ovulating today, I am not ovulating today, right? So it is based on history, on biography. All right, so let's go in now into these symptoms. The primary symptoms of ovulation are directly related with the reproductive tract of the woman. And they are what is known as the body temperature, the basal body temperature, which we all have a basal body temperature, right? Being what? In Fahrenheit? 98.6 on average. Again, a Gaussian distribution there. In centigrade? 37, about 37 degrees centigrade, right? So 37 degrees centigrade, 98.6 Fahrenheit, that's the thermometer, that's the measurement. Depends on where in the body you take the measurement, under the arm or under the tongue, etc. You get somewhat of a different reading by a few decimals. But body temperature, then the activity of the cervix is a muscle which is between the vagina and the uterus, is truly the opening to the internal organs of the woman. Because we can consider physiologically, anatomically, the vagina really kind of an extension of the skin. So the true, real opening into the internal organs of a woman is the cervix, okay? And it's a circular muscle. It is a smooth muscle. It is known as a sphincter. Circular muscles are sphincters, like the mouth, like the anus, like the pylorus and the other muscle at the entrance and at the exit of the stomach, etc. All right, so it's a circular smooth muscle. And then the cervical mucus, so all the inner lining of the reproductive tract of the woman is producing this fluid, this mucus, which is a very complex chemical and vital for procreation, really. It's the highway for the sperm to which they travel. It is at the same time nourishing for the sperm, bless you, and it's also bactericide. In other words, it has qualities to maintain the tract sterile, all right, and also lubricant and so forth. So this cervical mucus has many functions that are all geared toward either enhancing fertilization or preventing fertilization, depending on when the woman has on the cycle, precisely. All right, so let me see. The 7 minor or the 7 secondary symptoms, secondary symptom as side effects, if you will, of the ovulation of the woman are mitral smirts, spotting, swollen vagina and or vulva, increased libido, breast tenderness, general bloating, and firming. Okay, let me go through these just briefly, and then I'll go back to the 3 primary because that's really the nitty-gritty. That's where those are the most reliable symptoms. These here are less reliable, and so they are taken in a complexity. Because like I say, these have, again, in any population of women or any sample of the population of women in the world, there's going to be a Gaussian distribution for each one of these. Again, understood those terms, right? Okay, so Mittelschmerz comes from the German, which means middle pain, literally, Mittel is middle, and Schmerz is pain. So the pain in the middle is the pain that women feel when they're not menstruating, at the opposite end of menstruation. Okay, so menstruation may be painful, but they're obviously not ovulating on menstruation. They're getting rid of an egg that is overripened. This is precisely around the time of ovulation because the fimbriae, the little hands of the fallopian tubes, the end of the fallopian tubes, come literally close. They close in on the ovary. They move in on the ovary, even if it's just a few millimeters, and she's feeling that, and that can cause some pain. It's amazing, but real, and that's what happens there, okay? So if pain, typically on the side, one or both, that is associated with ovulation itself. Intensity varies from woman to woman, from cycle to cycle, from year to year, etc. Spotting, also a little bit of blood that can be leaked out from the rupturing of the follicle itself, right? Which is not menstrual blood, it's a different type and quality little spots. Also, the external, the edge, if you will, the opening of the vagina tends to swell, tends to accumulate fluid and swells somewhat. Also, the whole tract is becoming receptive for intercourse, which is the natural thing. The libido is, in psychological terms, the desire for intimacy, which is, again, a natural thing associated with an elevated level of estrogen. So that is natural, which again cycles in the woman and not in the man once we reach reproductive age. And so here, this one in particular could be a challenge, if you will, at the psychological level and possibly spiritual when we talk about NFP, okay? And depends if NFP is being used for seeking to get pregnant or seeking to avoid pregnancy. So these are the psychological dimensions that we need to consider. And while I'm here, I would like to mention a little further about hormones in general, because hormones are very, very powerful substances. A small amount can have a big effect in the body, okay? Either physically or psychologically, which is amazing because here you have an actual physical biochemical substance that when hitting a target in the brain causes a behavior or a desire for a behavior, okay? And so we have to be very careful with hormones because a small amount can have a big impact, either positive or negative. And another case, if you will, against the artificial hormone of contraception. For example, steroids or hormones, and we know about steroids in sports, that they can make the difference between winning or losing the gold medal, right? And but they're definitely forbidden because a small amount can have a big effect on the body, physically and psychologically. Breast tenderness also, because it's the breasts are also preparing for an eventual pregnancy, which means within 9 months lactation, and so it's a natural reaction also. The general bloating or a feeling of excess water that is accumulating in the body. And ferning, which is a very interesting aspect, this has to do with hormones in the saliva, okay? Because the estrogen is going to diffuse through the whole body. And sometimes it does cause the flashes and all that toward the menopause, toward the end of the cycling of the woman. These hormones throughout the body also cause that sensation of hot and cold, the flashes and all that. But ferning is an interesting thing because it turns out that this estrogen and these hormones in the saliva are complex biochemical structures. But the bottom line is that because they are complex biochemical structures, they can crystallize. And they form a particular crystal pattern that looks more or less like a fern, all right? Like a fern plant, and that's why it's called ferning. Yeah, so let's look at ferning. The only, yes, hello? Let me see that for a moment, inside there. Yes, thank you. The door is open.
Yes.
Hello?
I was wondering, is this the place where I can do my taxes?
Yeah. Excuse me for a moment. Let me pause this for a moment. Pause recording. Okay, sorry about that. So here is a photograph of what I mean by this ferning pattern. Some of it looks more ferning, some other doesn't, but essentially it's the crystal structure of the estrogen. Okay, the crystal structure of the estrogen that looks like a little fern more or less. You have to use a little imagination. Okay, I get it. Let me see if this can go higher. Oh. There's some patterns that are more fern-like. Here, this one. You see the little pattern there? Trying to make this bigger. Here we go.
This is in the saliva.
This is in the saliva of the woman when she's ovulating. And of course, it's microscopic. Oops. Let's make that mistake. And, but it's microscopic and it has to, so she takes a little sample of her saliva and puts it on a very clean glass, clear glass, and lets it dry room temperature. Passive drying will crystallize the estrogen that's there. Okay, you can see it starts crystallizing from the center out. This is the spot of saliva here. And then, but this is still microscopic and transparent to the naked eye. So one has to use a little instrument. And in fact, they're called ferning microscopes. You can buy a little ferning microscope, which is a little tube. And so you can look through the tube and possibly detect this ferning pattern, all right? And that's another sign of ovulation because of the excess estrogen that is in her system. It actually diffuses through the pores into the saliva. Okay, but these are secondary and therefore not as trustworthy. Again, they vary from woman to woman, from cycle to cycle, etc., etc. I want to go back to the primary because really these are the most accurate ones. They're the ones that are more directly related with the ovulation event. Okay, and what do we have? We all have a basal body temperature, which we stated, 98.6 and 30 Fahrenheit, 37 centigrade, and that's on average. What happens is that at ovulation, that temperature goes up slightly, anywhere from 0.1 degree to 1 degree. on average, maybe half a degree. All right, so we're talking about, instead of 98.6, 99.1. All right, 37.5. So it's very small. However, there are thermometers that can measure that today. There are thermometers typically digital that can measure decimals and centesimals of temperature. Okay, so the precision is there. It's about the accuracy. Okay, so and while I'm on that topic, to clarify the difference between accuracy and precision, for example, precision is about the number of decimal points. Accuracy is whether the information is true or not. So for example, what's the temperature in here now? Well, they try to make it a little better, but it's about 65 degrees or Fahrenheit. It's cold, right? Let's say it's 65 degrees. All right, well, maybe it's 65.58752. So I give you, 6 or 7 decimals. That is precision. The number of decimals that I add to the information is precision, giving you a very precise temperature. But if I tell you that it's in here, it's 100 degrees and it's 100.967854, I've given you a very precise number, but it's not accurate at all because it's not 100 degrees in here. Okay, so you see the difference between precision and accuracy. Accuracy has to do whether it's true or false, or how close it is to true. And precision has simply to do with the number of decimals, which is more of a technological thing, what the instrument can bear. Okay, so back to basal body temperature, the BBT, we all have it, but it varies through the day. And it's going to be the lowest typically when? day or night?
At night.
At night, because the body, this has to do with metabolism, right? And when the body, the metabolism is at its lowest, that's when we're producing the least heat. So the passive metabolism overnight, which is basically just maintenance of life, of survival, okay? That's going to be our lowest PPT, which is that normal one that's measured. As soon as we get up in the morning and we start moving, especially when we drink that hot coffee, that temperature starts rising and fluctuating throughout the day. So for this, for the woman to be accurate, the best thing is for her to take it around 5 o'clock in the morning, typically, for example, for a typical day, you know, before she actually gets up, because once she gets up, that temperature is going to start fluctuating. So the ideal would be to take it very early in the morning, before dawn, just before dawn sometime, lying down in the bed, take the temperature, and then just let the thermometer be, because that thermometer will be a digital thermometer that will record that temperature very precisely, maybe to a centesimal, and the information is stored there. And then later when she gets up, she can take the thermometer and chart that temperature on a graph, maybe in Excel or a spreadsheet, you know, every day like that. So the ideal would be to take it at the same time, every day, lying down and so forth. Because like I said, once she gets up, that temperature is going to change. Number one. Number two, guess what? When there's an infection, even a low-grade infection, temperature naturally rises. It's part of the generalized immune response, right? And so that temperature can also spike if she has some kind of an infection, even a mild infection, which could or could not be associated with the reproductive tract. It happens. There's more complexity in the female body as a whole. So of the three symptoms, the least reliable, of the three primary, the least reliable is that. But it serves kind of to corroborate the other two. Okay, by far, these two are the most accurate ones, the activity of the cervix and the cervical mucus. So let's go a little further into that. I'll come back to this in a minute. So let's look at the cervix and its activity. John, question, comment?
Yeah, how much higher with temperature for the base?
It could be anywhere from 0.1 to 1 degree. So it's a very narrow range, but it's within less than 1 degree, typically. And again, a normal distribution, normalized. So at the two extremes, it could be a woman that actually fluctuates maybe 2 degrees, which is to her advantage. Okay, but it's cycle by cycle, and so it's a large range there. Okay, so here are two diagrams, right, of cross-section of a woman's uterus, and there is a line established here, a horizontal line during the fertile time, and you can see at the infertile time how the cervix drops and becomes firm. It's known as firm and low, and it typically also goes off center. It goes off center. Okay, now this is a smooth muscle, therefore there's no voluntary control over it. This is all natural, in coordination, if you will, with the hormonal level, with what is happening in her cycle. Okay, so you notice that the os is closed, closed meaning kind of tight like this, kind of like a lip, a closed lip, tight-lipped. And the os is just the opening. By the way, cervix means neck in Latin. So it's just the neck between the vagina and the uterus. And that smooth muscle closes up, which is literally like tight lips, gets off center, all geared toward not allowing anything to come in, because that's an opening to the internal organs of the woman. The fluid itself is going to be tacky. I'll get to the cervical mucus, which is of all 10 symptoms by far the most accurate one, because that's at the biochemical level. And we'll look at that in a minute. In contrast to the fertile time, during the time of ovulation, it's called high, all right? It sits high on the vagina. And The mucus is flowing. The os is opened. The os is mouth in Latin. And the mucus has this consistency of an egg white mucus, which is clear. Don't let the white throw you off, all right? The egg white is actually clear, right? And also it is soft. It is soft to the touch. So there is a self-exam that the woman can do with her finger, either the middle finger or the index finger. The middle one is a little longer, so it's to the advantage. But the sensitivity of the tip of the finger is enough to detect these differences between firm and soft, between high or low. In fact, sometimes it is so high that the finger doesn't actually reach all the way up there, okay? And the os and the whole cervix is so dilated that it becomes part of the ceiling, if you will, of the vagina, and it's practically impossible to detect any kind of protuberance there. That's at its maximum expansion, if you will. Obviously geared, correlated to the ovulation event, okay? All right, questions or comments? Of course, this is enlarged probably about 4 times or twice and twice again. The structure in natural size would be about 1/4 of the size or less, but still large enough to be detected by the finger. Okay, let's move forward. Look at the mucus itself. What do we have? Different consistencies. So the mucus is a complex biochemical fluid, which serves as, like I pointed out, first of all, lubricant, right? Lubricant for the sperm and lubricant also for the penis within, so it depends where the mucus is. If the mucus is in the fallopian tube and the uterus, then it's a lubricant for the sperm. If it's in the vagina, it's actual lubricant for the penis in the act of intimacy. It also is a nutrient for the sperm itself. Keep in mind that the sperm has very little cytoplasm, right? So by itself, can only live an average of 24 hours. If it's still within the body of the male, it will be reabsorbed by the epididymis or the seminal tubules, or in ejaculation, it will live very little. But within the female tract, up to about 5 days. So there's a lot of nutrition that is supplied by that cervical mucus, okay? Also, it serves as a highway, if you will, because it's mostly made up of proteins. It's called mucolipoproteins, but these are long molecules, polymers, as we saw briefly when we were talking about proteins earlier. And when the woman is in her fertile time, okay, and that mucus is elastic like that, these proteins are long stretched out, and fiber after fiber after fiber, the end result is that they generate kind of a highway for the sperm through which they wiggle. All right, you have to think in your mind's eye, microscopically, what is happening here. That sperm is not just floating in midair. There's no air in there. It's all those tubes, which are tiny, the fallopian tubes, you know, are all filled with this fluid. And so it's a highway, it's a liquid highway where the sperm travel during ovulation, during the fertile time. Just finished the concept. When she's not ovulating, those same proteins change biochemical structure. It has a pH change. It's a number of factors, but typically a change in pH will alter the conformation, the tertiary, the quaternary conformation of the proteins, so they start twisting and winding upon themselves, and instead of forming a highway, they form a roadblock, okay? Which is a very effective roadblock because it's down at the molecular level and the cellular level of the size of the sperm. And effectively, they form even a plug at the cervix, so that this same mucus now acts as a antiseptic, so that not only sperm, but bacteria or fungi or anything else gets inside, because that's, like I say, the gateway to the internal organs of the woman. And so that mucus is very functional, all right, which again has been selected by evolution over millions of years to have that effectiveness. Okay, let me stop for a moment. Questions?
Are those days?
Yes, yes, exactly. So it does change from day to day, just like that. Okay, and so here is basically half a cycle, and it starts with this tacky. It's called tacky, and then it starts becoming elastic, and it sticks to the point that it can go beyond an inch. All right, even 2 inches. That's the fertile time here. Here's the egg white. Okay, this one here is just trying to illustrate with a caricature a lot of that fluid flow, which again is going to vary. It's going to be normalized among the entire population of women. So some women may have a lot of flow, some may have very little flow, and most of them are somewhere in between, and it will vary from cycle to cycle, from year to year, and so forth. But on average, this is what's happening, is that mucus is becoming more and more elastic and fluid and dynamic, okay? And then after ovulation, it starts climbing up again. It becomes tacky and not elastic, and it changes opaque, even into a yellowish color, or at least whitish, loses all of its elastic dynamics. And so there it is. Again, this is on average, and it takes the expertise of the woman to detect this cycle by cycle, and little by little become familiar with the symptoms herself, okay, on a monthly basis. All right. So, okay, questions or comments here? See how it works, John?
So during the really elastic fertile days, is that when even pre-ejaculate could potentially, because it's like a highway, it's so...
Yes, exactly. Good question. So here, that's why it's so dangerous for well, couples, or whether they're married or not, but typically the classical scenario is for teenagers who obviously are not married and are fooling around, and they become intimate. Even if there is no penetration, she can still get pregnant, all right? She can still get pregnant if he happens to ejaculate, and then she touches herself and so forth, she could still get pregnant, okay?
How long does the fertility period last?
Okay, on average, it's 24 hours, it's 1 day. So the average window of fertility is 1 day, but again, it's normalized, so it can be stretched out to 2 days or 3 days. But keep in mind that since the sperm lasts up to 5 or even 6 days within the reproductive tract, she could be ovulating, have intercourse, and then she could be ovulating 2, 3, 4, 5 days later and still get pregnant, because theoretically, that sperm could still be alive. Some of the sperm could still be alive, and they have traveled all the way up to the tubes, and they're just kind of hanging around in the ampulla waiting for a leg to appear. Okay, so therefore, the window is going to be on average about 5 days, plus, let's say, 2 more days of margin, 1 day of margin before and 1 day of margin afterwards. So that gives it, let's say, 7 days. All right, and it's a convenient number because 7 is 1/4 of the 28-day of the lunar cycle. Therefore, on average, we can say that the woman is fertile 1/4 of the time every month, 1/4 of the time. So for every month, on average, under, let's say, the ideal woman who is very regular and so forth, will have that window of 1 week per month. Which means for the couple who is seeking to avoid conception, they have on average 3 weeks where she cannot get pregnant because there's no fertile egg there, okay? And therefore, they could have intercourse anytime during those 3 weeks, and there would be no pregnancy. But the 1 week, that is the window of pregnancy, on average. Now, again, there's a lot of variation here from woman to woman, and each one will have their personal experiences to relate.
And also
Diana?
keep in mind that of those 3 weeks,
Yes.
another almost a week, like around 5 days, you're menstruating too.
Yes, exactly. So again, it's according to the dynamic of each couple, all right? Because again, menstruation is painful, has other issues and so forth. So maybe, and that's also when the woman just physiologically and psychologically is least receptive, naturally. Okay, and so what is built in here is a lot of consideration and a lot of communication and dialogue between the couple, a lot. I'll get to that point in a minute. I'm basically covering mostly the physiological, the biological background now. Okay, anything else there? Let me say then that there are several methods and protocols around, depending on the emphasis, more or less technology involved, giving more or less credit to the other symptoms and so forth. But the 4 or 5 major ones are these: the Crichton model, which, as I mentioned, is known as NAPRO technology or NAPRO technologies. Actually, I should put this in the plural. Oops. Right? From Creighton University, and that's why it has that name. In fact, I mentioned the speaker for next Saturday's seminar. Then there's another one called the Couple-to-Couple League. And then there is the symptothermal method, which, as the word implies, it looks at the symptoms, but also places quite a bit of emphasis on the temperature, which, like I say, of the 3 primary is the least trustworthy. Billings is related to Dr. Billings. It was actually a couple, a married couple of 2 doctors, him and her. So the Billings developed essentially the mucus method, this one, okay? This is a photograph that I took from a book that I'll circulate, which is a place, it's an institute outside of Washington, D.C. It's called Family of the Americas. Family of the Americas, and it's based on the Billings method. And this Family of America essentially is a lady, Mercedes Arzu, from Guatemala. And she is the wife of a former president of Guatemala, who was very concerned about the poor people. I lived in Guatemala for a number of years. It's a beautiful country, but it has strong social issues, a lot of poverty, unfortunately. And so they were looking for a method that would be accessible to women who didn't have much education, much access to technology, had to be working all the time and so forth, so complicated lifestyles. And it's essentially based on the Billings method. So it's mostly just the cervical mucus. Okay, becoming familiar with the cervical mucus and the os, if they can get their hands cleaned. Because again, keep in mind that visual inspection, that tactile inspection can cause infection if the hands are not clean. All right, so that's an important consideration. At any rate,
Is that the same method called Ogino method? Sorry? Ogino?
No, it's not Ogino, okay? It's not Ogino. We'll talk about Ogino in a minute. But this is also the method that Mother Teresa and her sisters have been using in India effectively with an analogous population, comparable population of poor women that don't have much education and certainly not access to technology like a thermometer or anything like that. Okay, so it's just on the symptom of the woman. The most reliable by far is going to be the cervical mucus. So this little booklet, as you can see from the Family of the Americas, this one happens to be in Spanish, but there is the same version in English, and it's very, very intuitive. You can see it has the little squares that the woman plots daily for each cycle, and then she starts getting a record of that cycle after cycle, month after month, so it builds on her confidence to determine when she is in fact ovulating and when she is not ovulating. All right. All right. So that's the one that at the end of the day, I think after looking at all this over a number of years and so forth, I would go with this one as a basic starter, as a default. Okay. And if the couple has more access to technology, more affluence, whatever, even if it's a medical couple, because some married couples are MDs, right? Either him, her, or both, or related in the healthcare issue, they may go a more sophisticated method like the Crichton model and so forth. But as a baseline, I think as a default, I would recommend this Family of the Americas. They're also online. They have a beautiful website, and it's very, very user-friendly and very respectful, of course, of the dignity and the sanctity of human life, because it aligns perfectly with our Catholic teaching. All the while, I have been focusing on the woman, on the wife, and her symptoms and detection and reliability and confidence level. The other fellow who is kind of in the background is the husband. So what about the hubby, right? Because for him, all of this is theory, right? He's not ovulating, he's not menstruating, he's not producing cervical mucus, and he's not getting pregnant either. So what about him? Okay, this is where true manhood comes into play, in my opinion. Okay, this is the real man will respect and not talk about it. So this is where, obviously, discipline, respect, communication, has to land. This is where the tire meets the road in what we call mature, responsible, sacrificial love. Okay? So the communication is basic. And that's why NFP, at the end of the day, what it does, it consolidates the bonding of the couple. Because they're either going to try to live it or not. And this is also why couples who use NFP, many of them end up having more children, okay, when they can, because it rearranges the priorities. What happens is, what used to be priorities, that list of serious, grave reasons for avoiding conception, which were finances, relocation, immaturity, et cetera, many grave reasons. But those grave reasons are subjective, right? They're objective, but also subjective. In other words, what could be a grave reason for one couple may not be such a grave reason for another couple because their priorities have rearranged. And I'll give you one example. When I was at a parish in South Miami, early in my priesthood, it happens that I met a married couple there, and I've known her since we were little kids because we came out of Cuba. Our families, our mothers knew each other for many years. We ended up in New York for a while. Growing up, my parents, my brother and I were kids, and this lady and her brother were about the same age, so we hang around and we lived in the same building. And this was back in the 60s, okay? Then we never heard more about each other. We went into Latin America, actually, with my dad started working with Alitalia. We kind of lost contact, and then I came here in the 70s to study biology, marine biology. And it turns out that this lady had already married a fantastic, great man, and they met at the Blessed Sacrament, actually, and married, and they were living now in this parish where I was assigned, my first parish assignment. So we reconnected and renewed the friendship, and they were very pro-life. They were practicing NFP, and they ended up having 7 children. Okay, and so what happens is that many times the argument from the contraceptive mentality people is that, yeah, NFP, they call it what? They call it the Vatican roulette, right? In other words, look at NFP couples end up having a lot of children. So obviously it doesn't work. It's not that it doesn't work, it's that their priorities rearranged. And they told me, I'll give you one detail of this particular couple because they had so many children. What did they do at Christmas time, right? And all the influence in South Miami with the affluent neighborhood and the expectations of the peers and all that, obviously they needed some presents for the kids. Well, you know what they do? In the summertime, they go around, just a couple, the adults, the parents, they go around the neighborhood or even further away looking at garage sales. And in the garage sales, they have bought bicycles for $2, you know, all kinds of stuff very cheaply that works, is fine, but people just getting rid of it and they buy good stuff, low price, and then they just store it somewhere, hiding. And at Christmas time, all the kids have all kinds of presents. Okay, they even bought a chimney. They showed me this fireplace that is artificial, of course, and works with some kind of electrical thing, but it looks very nicely like a fireplace. They put it for about $5 or something somewhere out in the neighborhood. Okay, so that's creativity. In other words, the priorities are rearranged, right? And it's all about the human aspect and the sacramental aspect of the marriage. So they are definitely open to the presence of God in their daily lives. Now, all these kids, I can tell you, have grown up because this was in the 70s. It's been 30 years now. And they're all grown up. They're all professionals. One even studied here for a while, got accepted into medical school. Eventually, he didn't like what medical life would be like, what an MD life would be like, and changed into something else. I think he's in a biotech now or something like that. Very bright kid. Another one is an architect. Another one is in construction. Another one is a counselor. Another one studied here. One of the girls studied law. She's a lawyer. You know, they all became professionals. They all became professionals. They started their own lives, their own families, and so forth. And so from 7, I don't know how many dozens of grandchildren they have now. Mm-hmm. And also, number one. Number two, at some point, by the time the young one was being born, the oldest one was already a teenager and was an automatic babysitter at home so the parents could take off. So there are other dynamics about large families. Okay, now of course it's case by case, and each family has to make that decision. Each couple has to make that decision. But the fundamental openness, and that's where now going into the bioethical analysis of this, you'll see how there's a fundamental difference there between this and the contraceptive mentality, which is what makes this actually ethical, with all the risks involved, right? But like I pointed out, even with contraception, in the best case scenario, it's not 100%, it's never 100%, so it's not exempt of risk either. And perhaps the downside is that because they are contracepting precisely, the perception is that they're 100% safe. And then come the surprises. Okay, so let me move on to the actual bioethical analysis. We have to justify it at 2 levels. We have to justify it at the level of a means and at the level of an end. All right, because again, the key document here, the flagship document, is Humanae Vitae, the encyclical of Pope Paul VI in 1968, which talks about, for grave reasons, excuse me, so that's the end, but the means also have to be justifiable. In other words, natural means as opposed to the artificial barriers to the sexual act. So let me move forward. As a means. Why does it become ethical? Because there is no direct intervention, there is no direct separation or fragmenting the unitive and the procreative dimensions, okay? It is very theological. I understand that it's very theological, but it's important to look at acts, human acts, not as acts of man as in an animal act, all right, as could be the act of digesting, right? But rather a human act in its fullness, engaging body and soul one. And of all the acts that we do on a daily basis, I cannot think of an act that is more human engaging, that should engage both body and soul, that sexual intimacy between a couple, hopefully between a married couple, okay? Because of all the reasons that I gave earlier, the commitment and the risk and the just the level of intimacy that is happening there that doesn't happen with any other kind of relationship. And therefore, it is truly, truly respectful of our nature as humans, as God's image. And then it just allows for that marital intimacy of body and soul one into that life project together, right? So as a means, it is respectful of all this, which cannot be said of the artificial means, even if it's just at the level of intention, of desire. In other words, when a person is using artificial means of contraception, that person or that couple cannot but desire to make that separation between the unitive and the procreating. As an end itself, again, when it's used for avoiding conception, the same grave reasons apply. Okay? So this is at the level of the end. And therefore, there is that for well-grounded reasons is this translation, grave or serious reasons, of spacing those births. So this is the end in itself. And this is from the encyclical Humanae Vitae, paragraph 16, the second sentence B, 16b. So that's, every paragraph is numbered, and then every sentence can be notated also by simple letter. Okay, I want to go a little bit more into this means and ends and why is it not contracepting? When the couple, let's say a couple who is practicing NFP. Now, you understand also that to practice NFP, one doesn't need to be religious, okay? One just needs to want to be healthy and practice this even for health reasons. So secular atheist, humanist couple could practice NFP simply for the health of it. They don't want to deal with hormones. They don't want to deal with condoms. They don't want to deal with anything artificial. They just want to go the natural way, and the symptoms are there. There's no belief in God, faith, or religion or anything. They're just doing it for the health of it. And okay, fine. But it's the mentality, it's the intentionality. Okay, when a couple is practicing NFP, they have to know that there's always the risk of fertilization. In other words, they have to know that each cycle is going to be a variation on the mean. And even if they have a lot of track record and a lot of robust statistics, okay, and she's saying, okay, honey, I'm not ovulating today, for whatever reason of that particular cycle may have been off. And in fact, she is. And just she failed to detect the symptoms for any number of reasons. So a couple who practice an NFP has to know they have to be open to the possibility of fertilization, even in spite of their best effort to avoid it. There has to be that fundamental openness. They know that there's a risk level here. That is in radical contrast with a couple who is contracepting, because the intentionality of that couple is to have absolute 100% control of the contraception. Okay, they are seeking in the intention, even if they know that the pill is 95 to 97 to 99% effective, even if they know that statistically, they know that stat theoretically, that's still just a number on a sheet of paper. Their desire is to have absolute control. You see? So there's really no openness. At the level of intentionality, at the level of desire, which is subjective but real. And that's where the challenge is, and that's where the difficulty is, at least from the ethical analysis of the church, the theological analysis. Because the contracepting couple seeks to have absolute control over fertilization or not, then it is an explicit exclusion of the author of life, of the Creator. See? And so that's why I say ultimately it really is an act of arrogance, whether it's conscious or not, because it is seeking, consciously or not, to put God or the author of life out of the picture. Whereas in NFP, the couple is realizing their true role in human procreation, which is that they are co-creators. Okay, co-creators, which is a very exalted role, but a role of collaboration. Okay. Okay. Questions, comments? No? I want to review here for a moment a little write-up that I had. I had made some notes from last year. Yeah, these notes here, just to make sure I covered the points. Just a little summary. Only at ovulation could a woman get pregnant, and knowing that time of ovulation, just as a summary, will give the woman the information she needs. Then the margin, the symptoms. Oh yes, well, the rhythm method, let me mention this briefly, and this is a little larger. It's not the rhythm method, okay? It's important to know that NFP is not the rhythm method, because the rhythm method is based on menstruation. Menstruation is discarding the over-ripened egg. And I make a simple analogy. When the body throws out the garbage, it's secondary, because the main event has already happened, which is ovulation. It's similar, a simple analogy. After dinner, there's going to be some garbage, and when that garbage is thrown out, is secondary. We can throw it out immediately after the dinner, or in an extreme case, being thrown out even the day after, all right, depending on what we do with the garbage. But the main event was the dinner itself. And so all of the symptoms of NFP are to focus on the ovulation. And that's why the rhythm method, which is based on menstruation, is not that effective. Some women are very regular and it works for them. Fantastic. But most women are really not that regular all the time. And so it's a much greater risk. Okay. But it's important to confuse them, because when you talk about natural, still some people in society think of, oh, that's the rhythm, which is the Vatican roulette, because it's not that effective. Right?
So for that is that you send that somehow you'll be sending Mr. Osis.
Yes, I can send you this one also. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a nice little summary. Okay. Okay, so it's just basically a summary of what I've been talking about, BBT, and then I go into each method here, each symptom. Yeah. Let's see if at the end I have.
Did you send the document?
No, I just sent the outline, which is what I gave you. Yeah, I haven't sent anything else. I'll send it to you. Yes, I'll send this. It's a nice little summary. Okay, the other one.
Teach from that.
Sorry?
You can teach from that.
Yes, you can use it, and that's exactly. Every time I give you stuff, feel free to use the PowerPoint, notes, all that, because that's precisely the thing to diffuse this. All right?
It's just a comment. It's funny how most of doctors nowadays have no clue about what NFP is.
Yeah.
Every time you mention it, they think you're talking about the rhythm method.
Exactly.
And we
Yeah,
had
it's
this
amazing.
conversation with my OB/GYN the other day, and I was talking to him about nanotechnologies, and
Right.
he had no idea what it was.
Right.
And he was like, "Yeah, I have a lot of patients that they practice the rhythm method." I'm like,
Yes,
"It's not what I'm
exactly.
talking about."
Exactly. Imagine that you will be in the very challenging situation of trying to educate
You're
medical doctors.
Yes.
All right. It's at this level. And once we take an hour to look at it, it's really so simple in principle. It's so simple,
Not a
right?
lot of doctors practice it now.
That's
In
amazing.
fact, I believe the closest doctor that is practicing nanotechnologies now is in Tampa.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. No. We have some in town. Okay. We have some in town.
I have
But not OBGYN. Okay. I'll have to do a little research on that. But
it would be great if you
yeah.
if you find, because I have two friends that are, for various reasons, they're going to this doctor.
right.
And one went up north and
Wow.
the other one went to Tampa. But here
Right.
in Miami, they couldn't find anyone that
Right.
really
Wow. Okay. Well, that's for NAPRO specifically, right?
correct.
Oh,
for
okay.
now.
Yeah. So it depends what, then typically a doctor will go into a particular system, or a method. So yeah, we have to look at that.
They are a lot of persons that teach. They
Yes.
teach the methods.
Right.
They're not like actual doctors.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. I know some. So we're trying to put together in the Archdiocese of Miami a team of MDs and clinical professionals, all right, that can teach this at different levels, either with a couple or in a class situation and so forth. We're working on that, and Mercy Hospital is trying to get a program together like this, okay? And also because the Archbishop has now mandated to include NFP into the marriage preparation.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so
we engaged this.
exactly. So this is exactly. So this is it's a work in progress, and the conference next Saturday, the seminar is part of this effort. Okay, so it's happening little by little, a ripple effect, but at several different fronts. And I can tell you also, as chaplain for the Catholic Medical Association in town, we're working with them on that. Okay. So little by little. I did want to point out, though, that typically NFP, even NFP, is many times used for avoiding conception, all right? But there's also the case where a couple is having difficulty, and then they can try to seek conception with NFP. Because, like you say, like I've been saying, the symptoms are just symptoms. They're neutral. It's how those symptoms are used, you know, to what purpose. So a couple who is having difficulty conceiving would then concentrate their intimacy precisely during the fertile time, all right? But again, it's, you know, it's subtle and delicate, and I think I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about maybe in the context of contraception, the fact that human fertilization really is very, very complicated because the infertility of a couple could be for many different reasons, all right? And it could be either on him or her. Traditionally, if the couple was infertile, who was at fault? Automatically, the woman was at fault, okay? And that's a misperception simply because, well, he can ejaculate and he's producing semen, so obviously it's her fault somehow, but not so. It has been found now that infertility on average is about 50-50. In other words, half of the time is because of female issues, and half of the time is because of male issues. Because even if there's semen, there could maybe not be 100 million sperm in there, okay? Low sperm count is a very typical one, or incompetent sperm, even aspermia, which is no sperm, and there's semen and no sperm, and unless you have a microscope, you can't tell that, etc., etc. So achieving conception for the couple who is having difficulty can be tricky also. Even psychologically, just the intense desire for that child may be impeding the couple from getting pregnant, all right? I've given you the example of the couple who were unable to get pregnant. They went to, either they adopted or went to the in vitro clinic, and now they have baby at home, and 6 months later she's pregnant once they weren't thinking about it anymore. So those cases do happen, and that points out to the complexity of fertilization, of human fertilization, all the factors involved. Then you have also different beliefs. For example, in principle, you would think that the couple who is having difficulty conceiving would concentrate their sexual activity during ovulation, and it could be perhaps if she has a low sperm count, if he has a low sperm count, all right, so that he builds up more sperm in the semen. However, there are also studies that say that the best semen, the most competent and potent semen, sperm, is fresh sperm, all right? So on that count, that couple would likely benefit from having more frequent intercourse simply because fresh sperm, in principle, is the more competent sperm. So at the end of the day, you really have to go couple by couple. And what may work for one couple may not work for another couple. And that's why fertility clinics is really, and that's also why, in my mind, they've gone to in vitro, because it's much simpler. It's much simpler to do it, to manufacture the baby in the lab than to deal with the human factors of all the variables that could be there. Okay, questions?
A couple use NFP to avoid children without grave reasons, contraceptive.
Right. A couple using NFP to avoid children without grave reason is contraceptive. Right, exactly. Thank you. Right. That's kind of the last point, that even a couple who is using NFP, depending on the intention, all right, could be contracepting in the sense that, fine, they're using a natural method, so they have justified it at the level of the means. They're using a natural method. They're not putting anything artificial in between. But if they're seeking to always avoid children, and they don't have the serious reasons, they don't have the grave reasons, they don't have the serious reasons for avoiding children. In other words, they have frivolous reasons, meaning they make sufficient money, but they just want to travel around, they just don't want children. Well, that's actually an impediment to the marriage. It's a canonical impediment. But in fact, that is a contraceptive mentality. Okay, so some couples could go that route in the sense that they don't want to have the chemicals or the mechanicals of artificial contraception, but they're using NFP as a contraceptive of a mentality, of the intentionality to always avoid it. And that's where, again, they're seeking to exclude God from the equation. Yes. So this should also be told to our Catholic couples who come for marriage preparation, all right, that it's not sufficient to justify it at the level of the means, it also has to be justified at the level of the ends. So, grave reasons. Okay, what else do I have here? Okay, I've told you all about this. I'll send this one also. How about we take a little break now? Because after this, we can go into other things that are occurring at the beginning of human life or more recent with the past couple of years. Something called three-parent embryos and something called chimeras, which is essentially a hybrid between a human and a non-human. Okay, as tragic as that sounds, is happening in some places today on Earth. So let's break here for a moment, and we'll come back in 10-15 minutes, right? I have 11:15, so 11, continue at 11, okay? Okay, yeah, pause recording. Okay, folks, welcome back. Welcome back. We're going to continue now on these two other issues that I pointed out at the very beginning in the first slide here, which are three-parent embryos, believe it or not, and chimeras. Okay, so now we're approaching the end of this course as such with the issues, bioethical issues at the beginning of human life. And these have come up in the past couple of years, I would say. They've been in the news. And one way or another, I would say there's not a month goes by without a bioethical issue coming up on the horizon, either at the beginning of human life or the end of human life or with the environment, right? And if we include the environment in this whole analysis, not a week goes by without something happening out there. Again, because a lot of it is driven heavily by technology, things that were science fiction a few years ago have become a reality today. And so if it can be done, the technological imperative philosophically says that everything that can be done will be done sooner or later. And that's a very scary thing because, you know, we can't drop nuclear bombs anywhere in the world, but should we do it? May we do it? That's the ethical analysis. And that's precisely the reason for bioethics. So in a sense, if you go into bioethics, you have job security because there's always going to be an issue. There's an increasing number of issues, an increasing complexity. And it's important, therefore, to know the biology, to know the technology, and that's where we make our analysis based on the evidence, right? Evidence-based and based on natural law. And also because of the link between technology and economy. Okay? Innovative technology moves the economy. And when you talk about economy, now you're talking politics, and then it can become ideological. And so to finish that circle, that's why philosophy is also important. And we do the logical analysis, what is reasonable. We use a good philosophical system so that we don't fall into ideology. Okay, so three-parent embryos. It has to do with mitochondrial diseases. There are several different types of mitochondrial diseases. It's a cluster of illnesses. but it has to do with this little organelle called the mitochondrion. One mitochondrion, several mitochondria. Okay, the mitochondrion looks like a little tiny bean inside the cell, okay? Like a, what is that called? Like a little peanut. Exactly, thank you. All right, coming from the biologist. Here's an idealized cell, all right, like you see in the standard biology textbooks. What's important with the mitochondrion? It happens that with the mitochondrion, this is the energy factory of the cell. In other words, this is where ATPs are recharged. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Remember, we obsess about, oops, too far down, further down. We obsess with acronyms and numbers in science. So adenosine triphosphate, it is an adenosine, so it looks very similar to adenine, the nucleotide, okay? And it has 3 phosphates hanging out on the side branch. Might as well, since it's the age of technology. Let's look at the stick diagram of an ATP molecule. Oh, this got really big. Here we go. There's your standard ATP. Here's the adenine, a double ring, right? A purine with the pentose, with a sugar ring, and a side chain of 3 phosphates. 1 phosphate, 2 phosphates, 3 phosphates. These bonds, these POP bonds are high energy bonds, okay? And this is essentially like the battery of a cell. This is where the cell gets its energy for metabolism, cellular metabolism, okay? And it is done very graphically, very mechanically when this bond is broken by hydrolysis. In other words, adding H's, adding hydrogens, what happens is the oxygen binds to the hydrogen, 2 hydrogens forms 1 water molecule. This bond is broken and there's an energy release. Relatively high energy release, which is used for metabolism, for the cellular function. So that translates, metabolism translates into life. At the cellular level, put all the cells together into tissues, organs, and body systems, you have the organism functioning, whatever organism in nature. So this ATP molecule is essential for life on Earth, for life, organic life, okay? Well, it turns out that they are recharged, go back here for a moment, when an ATP loses a phosphate, right, and releases that energy, it becomes an ADP. In other words, it becomes an adenosine diphosphate, DI, right? It loses the 3rd phosphate, so it now becomes a diphosphate, 2 phosphates. And it can lose the 2nd phosphate also, which will release some amount of energy, a little less energy, but still some amount of energy. And then it becomes an AMP, adenosine monophosphate. What happens then to the adenosine monophosphate? This adenosine monophosphate has to be recharged because guess what? You have used up the battery, you have used it up, and now you gotta recharge the battery. But the battery is rechargeable. So you put it back in the charger, right? Okay, that charger is the organelle peanut, the mitochondrion. So this mitochondrion inside the crypti, these cisternae, these folds, these ATPs, these AMPs and ADPs are being recharged back into ATPs and pumped back out into the cytoplasm for more metabolism. So bottom line, this organelle is responsible for recharging ATPs and therefore maintaining the life of the cell. All right, that's number 1. Number 2, just like any organelle in here, they can become defective or deform or even missing altogether. Very drastic. okay? But typically they're defective, they're deformed, they have some kind of issue with them. They also have their own DNA, by the way, and this is extranuclear DNA. It's not part of the actual genome of the nuclear genome of the animal or plant or fungus or whatever, okay? But they are, they have their own DNA, which codes for the proteins that make up their structures, essentially the membranes, and all the other the enzymes or whatever is needed in here for recharging those ATPs. So this is also known as mitochondrial DNA or mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA, which is extranuclear, but it's within that cell. And that is also why it is speculated that these organelles used to be independent organisms that got incorporated way back in evolutionary time. Similar to the chloroplast on plants, which is the one that photosynthesizes. So plants have mitochondria and chloroplast because plants are also living, right? So they need to recharge their ATPs. Whereas animals, we only have the mitochondria, no chloroplast, because we don't photosynthesize. But anyway, it's considered that mitochondria and chloroplast used to be independent organisms, unicellular, some kind of proteins maybe that got absorbed and partially digested, but not fully digested, so they kept their own DNA. And now they are incorporated into the cells of organisms. A little more detail here. This is a, too much. This is a micrograph, a photograph, microscopic photograph of an electron micrograph. So you can see that the diagram is simplified, fairly accurate. It has actually more cristae than is shown in this diagram. It's a double membrane. There's an outside membrane and there's an inner membrane, similar to the plasma membrane, to the cellular membrane, which is another indication possibly that this used to be an organism of its own because it has a double membrane just like the plasma membrane. Okay. The outer membrane is smooth pretty much around the organelle, but the inner membrane has infolds, and whenever you see infolds, functionally, what does that translate into?
More surface area.
Exactly, more surface area, an increased surface area. And who does that also in our bodies? The stomach, right? The fundus, the inside of the stomach, but also the brain. Very significantly, the brain, so that the volume of the brain, actually the surface area of the brain is increased tremendously by the infolding of the brain, by the sulcus of the brain, okay? And which is also highly important because that's where the thought process occurs. That's where the higher activity of the brain, the abstract thought, thinking, reasoning, and mathematics, for example, and understanding of this dialogue happens at the cortex of the brain, the cerebral cortex. All right, so similar here, increasing the brain, increasing the surface area inside so that more ATPs can be recharged per unit area and so forth. Also out here is the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum. This is a cross-section, as you can see, it's a cross-section of a mitochondrion, but it's also cross-sectioning part of the cell, of the cytoplasm. And what you see here is called the endoplasmic reticulum, which is another folding of membranes out there. And the little individual dots, you know what these individual dots are? Lining up that ER, that endoplasmic reticulum, those are called ribosomes. And that is another type of machinery. What happens at the ribosomes? Proteins are made, proteins are synthesized. So this is the landing place of these little dots, individual dots, okay? This is a complex macromolecule that is being photographed by an electron microscope. Imagine the hundreds, the thousands of times of magnification of this. These ribosomes, that's where proteins are synthesized. So this is the landing area of the messenger RNA and the transcript RNA, okay? To the transfer RNA for translation. So this is functionally, these little black dots, that's where translation occurs. Okay? All right. So what happens? Some women have deformed or defective mitochondria, and it's a cluster of mitochondrial diseases. Now, the next item of information that we need to know, that we already know, the ovum comes from whom? From the woman, okay? And the ovum is a cell of her body. Does the ovum have a nucleus? Yes, in fact, it has a pronucleus, right? Which is haploid or diploid? Haploid. Pronucleus, the egg and sperm, gametes, so they're haploid, right? Okay, so the nucleus is haploid in an ovum. How about does the human egg, the human ovum, does it have cytoplasm? Yeah, lots of it, okay? It has cytoplasm, and it has all the organelles, assuming that this egg is alive. Then, to be functioning alive, organically alive, we'll need the organelles to keep it alive, including the mitochondria. Okay, and because between the two, between the egg and the sperm, the one that has much more cytoplasm is the egg, right? The sperm is basically a nucleus, a pronucleus, with a membrane and a little bit of cytoplasm, but very little cytoplasm. So when fertilization occurs and the sperm is, let's assume that this is an egg. The sperm is poured into the egg, right? The pronucleus, the male pronucleus, and including its own cytoplasm also. So very few paternal mitochondria will go in here. That's number one, that very few paternal mitochondria, in other words, very few mitochondria from the father will go into the mother's egg. Number one. Number two, once those few mitochondria that go in are attacked by digestive enzymes and are essentially eliminated. Essentially because there could be some trace of some paternal mitochondria. But the point is that when this egg is fertilized, by definition becoming a zygote, the cytoplasm of that zygote comes essentially from the mother. And therefore, the organelles come essentially from the mother, and therefore the mitochondria come from the mother. And that's why we say that mitochondria are maternally inherited. The mitochondria of women and of men, because we men were produced by the egg of our mothers. Okay, so we inherited the nucleus of our mother, the pronucleus, and the pronucleus of our father, but we also inherited the mitochondria of our mothers. And so mitochondria are maternally inherited. And that is also why we can talk about mitochondrial Eve. Remember last semester? Going back in genealogy, so the mitochondria that I have in my body came from my mother. And the mitochondria in my mother's body came from her mother. And the mitochondria in my grandmother's body came from her mother, and so on and so forth. So you can do the genealogy tree, go back and back and back. And because they have their own DNA, here's the rub, because they have their own DNA, that DNA can be traced and mapped and see what percentage of compatibility there is with other women of the world. And you can do essentially a genealogical map with the mitochondrial DNA, not nuclear DNA, and trace, and you can see as you go back in generations of women, that DNA becomes more and more narrow, more and more compatible, pointing toward a common ancestor. The most recent common ancestor, remember? For all women. And that's what we call mitochondrial Eve. That's who we call mitochondrial Eve. So all women today have descended from a common female who had to be human to maintain the species. But also remember that that mitochondrial Eve can shift as we discover more variation and more, let's say, ethnicities are mapped. Then that broadens and that could go further back. Cannot come forward, cannot be more recent, can go further back, right? So, but that's essentially mitochondrial Eve, which doesn't correlate exactly to theological Eve or biblical Eve, all right? Because like I say, there was probably some ancestor, that woman, the mitochondrial Eve, probably came from a previous woman. We just haven't detected her yet.
And then that through the rate of mutations in the DNA of the mitochondria.
That's right. Yes, exactly. The SNPs or whatever the single nucleotide changes, which maps out to a variation. And as you go back in generations of women, that variation is less and less and less. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now what happens? Well, here we have a woman who has mitochondrial disease, which is this cluster of things. And because this is related to recharging ATPs, it could have anywhere from mild to serious effect on the metabolism of her or her children. And it's going to be typically associated with some issue of energy, right? The weakness or feeling weak or some other aspect of not, or it could also involve of not being able to metabolize well because there's not sufficient ATPs. So it's a problem, all right? And it becomes a clinical problem. So how to manage their kids, being that this woman is producing these eggs that have mitochondrial disease. They're compatible with life, but they have some kind of a defect. What happens is through in vitro, then one could take a woman who carries mitochondrial disease, okay, take her eggs through the process that we call hyperovulation, right? So we get her eggs, the nucleus is fine, her nuclear DNA is fine, but she has mitochondrial disease. So what's valuable from that egg of a woman who has mitochondrial disease? What's valuable from her egg? That's the disease one. That's the disease, right? She has mitochondrial disease. Is the mitochondrial disease in the nucleus or outside the nucleus? It's in the mitochondria, it's outside the nucleus, it's in the cytoplasm. So her nucleus is good. Her nuclear DNA is good, assuming her nuclear DNA is intact and normal and so forth. So her nucleus. So remember how in cloning, we enucleate an egg, right? And renucleate it with a somatic nucleus. Remember that from cloning? Okay, you should be familiar with terminology. In cloning, we enucleate an egg, discard the haploid egg, discard the haploid nucleus, and replace it with a somatic nucleus, diploid, in effect generating a zygote without fertilization. Okay, here is the opposite. From her egg, what is important, what is healthy is the nucleus. So we enucleate that egg, but now instead of discarding the nucleus, we discard the cytoplasm, which has the defective mitochondria. And we renucleate that nucleus into a female who is normal, meaning she doesn't have mitochondrial disease. She's donating her eggs, and that egg is going to be enucleated. Because what we want from the donor is her normal cytoplasm, her normal mitochondria. That's the donor woman. Okay, what we want from her, or what is, not me, not I, not us, but what this technique does is they want the normal cytoplasm. Has to be a donor woman because the woman who wants to have the child has mitochondrial disease. So somehow we have to get rid of her mitochondria, meaning her cytoplasm. We're not going to go in and take out every single mitochondria and replace them with healthy ones. That's absolutely too sophisticated. We don't have that level of sophistication and the risks are too much. Much easier. Since we can do the nuclear swap already, or it can be done in the lab, it's much easier to enucleate an egg from a donor woman, use her cytoplasm, which is good, and populate that enucleated egg with the nucleus of the woman who wants to have the normal child. Okay? So here the egg, so that's the basic, the one I'm describing is this one actually, which is the simplest case, all right? And then that would produce a normal egg, which has two components, has the cytoplasm of the donor woman and has the nucleus, the haploid nucleus from the woman who wants to be a mother, the deceased woman, the mitochondrial deceased woman, okay? So we have generated an egg with this a composite. It's still an egg, it's still a gamete, it's still haploid. It has the nucleus, and what's important is genetically what's important. What's important genetically is the woman who wants to have the child. The other woman is just donating her eggs, all right? But her nucleus was discarded because we don't want her genetic information, or this couple doesn't want her genetic information. All right, so then that egg is fertilized. Of course, that egg is not going to be reimplanted into the woman, right? That egg is going to be fertilized in vitro because the egg is outside in vitro anyway. So the egg now is fertilized by the husband or the donor sperm, whatever, some sperm is going to fertilize that egg, and a zygote is generated, which will then be grown to the blastocyst stage, 3 to 5 days, and then implanted into the woman. And if everything goes correct, that woman will have a child 9 months later, right? So you follow the diagram here. Again, we begin with a woman who wants to have a child, but she has mitochondrial disease. She wants to have a healthy child. Well, she needs an egg donor so that the donor egg has healthy mitochondria. But we're not interested in the nucleus, in the DNA of that donor woman, so that egg is enucleated. And then the enucleated egg is repopulated with the nucleus, only the nucleus, of the mother-to-be. Then fertilized, grown for a few days, implanted into the original mother, and if everything goes well again, 9 months later, a baby will be born. Follow the scenario? Scenario 1. Questions?
What would be the advantage to fertilizing both mother and donor in the method 1?
Right. Okay. So we go back here. This is scenario 2. All right. So I'm just reversing the order. There's no particular reason for 1 or 2. Let's look at the other scenario. See here the father of either the mother or the donor. Okay. Now, again, this is done in vitro, but what happens here is that right away you have a zygote.
Right.
So in a sense, it's a little less manipulation because now you're dealing with the diploid cell. All right. And so the egg is more delicate. This haploid nucleus, I remember, has no backup. If there's any damage on this haploid nucleus, that damage will be carried on. Whereas here you have diploidy already, so you have automatically you have the backup of the diploidy. Okay, so that's why the fertilization is done here. In fact, this fertilization here is not really necessary technically. You could also see a third scenario where only this one is fertilized because this nucleus, whether haploid or diploid, is going to be discarded anyway. Okay, it's just that there's more offense here. I mean, now you have actually a zygote, and when this zygote is enucleated, guess what? We have just killed that zygote. Okay, because here, this is a zygote, right? This is a fertilized egg, zygote. Soul, human, etc. Fertilized egg, zygote, human soul, enucleated. Oops, I just killed that zygote. Okay. So, plus this is not done in one, this is done in a hyperovulation situation. Typically, there could be a dozen eggs fertilized this way so that at least one of them makes it. And here's a swap. Okay, so enucleation, in this case of a haploid nucleus, in this case of a diploid nucleus. Follow the scenario. Now complete the cloning, right? And reimplant. So again, 3 to 5 days incubation and then into the womb, hoping that one of them will implant. And 9 months later, baby is born. So you see, it's an extension of the in vitro facility, the in vitro clinic, and so now in vitro can also offer this extended service. Can magnify their base of potential clients, which is women with mitochondrial disease. But in reality, so here's one parent, here's the other parent, and there's the third parent. So this child has 3 parents.
What would be the symptoms of mitochondrial disease? Right?
Generally, weakness because of the ATPs not recharged correctly, but there are other, I have not really looked into it in detail.
The
But,
mom can be completely healthy, but just
she can be, or she can have weakness herself, all right? But her nuclear DNA is still intact because it's the mitochondrial DNA that's affected.
And obviously she would be having trouble conceiving naturally is a big symptom.
Yes.
So it does not cause infertility.
Not necessarily, exactly. Not necessarily. It's a metabolic thing. Yeah. So here's the website. Explain about so I understand it's a cluster. Yeah, it can affect different organs of the body and their performance. It depends on what is being more effective. Includes seizures, strokes, severe development delays, inability to walk, talk, see, digest. So it's a cluster, okay? And it can be from mild to severe. Interesting. If 3 or more organs are involved.
That will cause that in the baby, right?
Any one of these, yes. Wow. The baby or the mother.
Or the mom.
Yeah. Depending on how severe it is. So, it's an issue, it's a concern, but the challenging thing from the bioethical perspective, so now we have to do the bioethical analysis, is in the midst of all this, right, has anyone thought to consult this child who will eventually be an adult, supposedly a normal adult, at least mitochondrially speaking, has anyone stopped to consider, did this child want to have 3 parents? We have to assume that he or she did not want to have 3 parents, because it's not natural. Plus, it involves in vitro, which already we have done the bioethical analysis of that. So, sad to say, it's just an excessive manipulation, not just because we can do it. Doesn't mean that we should do it, that we have a right to do it. Because this little guy in here, this little boy or girl, also has rights, natural rights. And one fundamental natural right is to have one father and one mother who I can go to and identify with and have them raise me together as I deserve. Okay? And so that's the grave injustice in this. Even though the in vitro can take care of this problem now, technically, all right, it is a utilitarian mentality of what can be done, will be done sooner or later, without true consideration of the embryo as human. The embryo is being essentially seen as a thing, as an object that can be manufactured in a healthy way.
Is there a possibility that this can be looked from a double effect perspective, saying that the 3 parents is just a double effect of getting rid of this, avoiding the transmission of the mitochondrial disease to the child?
Right. Okay.
Yet we still being open to life, because they try to.
Yes, of course. No one questions that they want to have a child, so there is an openness to life. But remember, those 5 conditions for the double effect. So we have to go one by one and see which one applies and which one doesn't apply. Okay. The fact that it involves in vitro, already that kills it there, because this woman, she doesn't have to be a mother in order to be alive and to keep on living. She has mitochondrial disease, so it's debilitating for her and so forth, but she doesn't have to be a mother. That's my whole point, is how far do we take? To have children is not really a right. It's a privilege. And some people, sadly, unfortunately, just can't have children. In fact, I would say that this woman, with all due respect, has a high moral responsibility to not have children. knowing that she has the disease, having children, she's going to pass that disease on to her children. So I would say that morally, ethically, she has a responsibility, a serious responsibility to avoid children. I mean, they can always adopt, all right? But to have a child, that's why I went into that intentionality, to have a child come, hell or high water, is objectivizing, is making this child an object of my desire, which I really don't have a right to do, because this child is not an object, it's a subject. It's a human being, it's an image of God. And so that possession, we just can't justify, all right?
I don't know if I missed this, but is there any natural way to cure this disease?
Bottom line, I don't know. Probably it can be managed, but because it's at the mitochondrial level, all right, at least to this day, I don't know any technique, any technology that will correct, because there are dozens or hundreds or maybe thousands of mitochondria in every cell, including the egg. And how are you going to correct that defect? It would have to be some kind of genetic correction on the mitochondrial DNA, which means on every single mitochondria, because if you get an egg, like let's say you cure 99% of the mitochondria of that egg, that 1% mitochondria still have the defect are going to be passed on to the next generation, to the next child, whether boy or girl, okay? And therefore, that child may have a more mild case, but eventually those mitochondria are going to replicate.
But since the mitochondria are really controlled by comes from the female side.
Correct.
And so the issue is over with the boy, it destroys that disease before. I mean, it destroys it from the woman's level.
Right, so the paternal mitochondria are essentially destroyed. Maybe a few, it's a percentage thing, but they are essentially destroyed. The few that get into the egg are essentially digested and destroyed as foreign bodies. So there's no way out of that naturally. It's just maternally, eggs mitochondria are maternally inherited. They're always on the maternal line. Okay, so maybe at some point, medicine could get to the point where they can cure a woman from her mitochondrial disease. I just don't see it how, because her eggs are full of mitochondria. They would have to do something in the ovaries, maybe at the pre-pubescent time, but there we're dealing, actually it's worse, because just thinking aloud the whole process through, actually when the baby is born, the baby girl, she has millions of eggs. You don't know which egg is going to make it to puberty or not, okay, or to menarche, to the first. And so you may be correcting the eggs that are not going to be used. I don't see any way out of the in vitro process involved in this. In other words, hyperovulation, taking out the eggs, manipulating them in the lab, and then going back in. And, it's an excessive risk already with hyperovulation. The problem with hyperovulation, one of the main problems bioethically, is that it's an excessive risk to the life of the mother, direct risk to the life of the mother. And she's not, her life is not threatened by not having children. I know it's a double negative, but think about it. We have to use a lot of double negatives in theology. The life of a woman is not risked by not having children. In other words, no woman dies from not having children. Okay? And therefore, it's extra. It's an added thing. And you make the argument, well, what about the next generation of humans in the world? Well, there are plenty of women, thanks be to God, that are healthy and can have the children. So it's not that the species is in danger because of this disease, Thanks be to God, it's a small minority of the population of fertile women in the world. So it's not that here the species is at risk of extinction.
How prevalent is this disease?
I don't know. I confess my ignorance on this. I just know the basic technique, but it came out a few years ago. And again, I think it was done in the UK because they have this liberal laws about in vitro. It was invented there to begin with, remember, in 79 with Louise Brown and the two doctors, Edwards and Steptoe, who I mentioned got the Nobel Prize for it. So now they have gone further. It's just expanding the in vitro services, basically, again, out of a utilitarian mentality to serve this other population of women who have this disease. I don't know how prevalent it is. It may vary from country to country. Again, my intuition is that since it's maternally inherited, if there's a high number of women who have this disease in one particular country because of our limited moving around when people know each other and start having children, I'm thinking my intuition is that the prevalence will vary from country to country or from region to region, simply because most people tend to marry people who are close to them geographically. So you follow the logic on the ground, and so they may vary from country to country. Some countries may be more prevalent than others. Okay, but you see, the problem is the whole hyperovulation and going through this excessive manipulation of the human embryo. I mean, every step of the way is risking the life and the health of this embryo. So keep in mind that the industry, that's why it's hyperovulation to begin with. You begin with an excess of fertilized eggs, excess of zygotes, and you use these spare embryos as body parts, as you know, like a spare tire. You broke one tire, throw it out and put on another tire. That's the mentality, and that's the reality, and it sounds crass, but at the end of the day, this is what the industry is doing. It is a manipulation, it is eugenics, all right? There's a word for this last century. It is eugenics because it's perfecting somehow the human race here. So that's the bottom line bioethical analysis of three-parent embryos. Very noble in intention, but the means also have to be justified. Moving on, another one. Of course, it's not going to stop there. Remember the technological imperative from a utilitarian mentality, what can be done will be done sooner or later, regardless of the ethics or whether we should or we should not. In fact, that camp justifies it because they see it as somehow for the benefit of humanity. In hybrids, chimeras. Now, the idea is to grow human tissue in animals, in non-humans.
Wow.
That's the bottom line goal here, all right? Again, this human tissue could potentially be used for healing patients with illnesses, diseases, or injuries, etc. So we go through a scenario. We start with a human who donates some somatic cell, which is reverted to pluripotency through IPS. Remember we saw IPS, induced pluripotent stem cells. Okay, so we take some adult stem cells from a human body and reprogram them to pluripotency, essentially to the blastocyst stage, right? Remember blastocysts or blastula are pluripotent. They're not totipotent. What's totipotent in embryonic development? Totipotent, full potential, first and second, right? Morula and, of course, the zygote. No, the zygote, totipotent, right? The whole embryo comes from the zygote, right? And the whole embryo comes from the morula. Every blastomere, every cell in the morula has the same potency. But then when we get to the blastula, the blastocyst, the third stage, there's already cellular differentiation. Remember the ICM and the trophoblast? And so they have lost their totipotency. They have become pluripotent, right? Okay, so those are the IPS, are pluripotent. So we have this human pluripotent cells, the IPS cells, in a petri dish, in a culture medium in the lab. Not unethical because we don't actually have an embryo here. Okay, we just have the cells, the pluripotent cells. Now, here's the rub. These pluripotent cells, human, are inserted into an animal embryo, into an animal blastocyst. In other words, into their analog in a non-human species. So we're taking blastocyst cells, human blastocyst cells, inserting them, injecting them literally into a pig blastula. This is done in the lab, of course. And then that pig blastula is reimplanted into the pig, female pig, to form a chimeric animal. In other words, an animal who is mostly pig, but has some patches of human tissues growing. Or it could be human organs growing, okay? So this is the diagram, this is the theory, and this is the practice down here. Here, this is an actual micrograph. This is a photograph, microscopic photograph, starting from the left. Here is the little suction tube that is generating an ever so mild suction there to hold this blastula in place, blastocyst. Here's the blastocyst. Whose blastocyst is this? This is the pig blastocyst, okay? Looks identical. If I show you human blastocyst, identical because it's mammalian. And it's, remember, there is compaction, so compaction is about the same size as the egg, okay? So this would look pretty much identical to the human blastocyst that I showed you in other pictures. In fact, here's a trophoblast. Here's the, what is this? That's the ICM of the pig. Okay, this will become the little piglet here. All right, and this will become the placenta of the piglet because the piglet is a mammal. All right, what's this little red cross? Is indicating the point of insertion where the trophoblast was punctured, little hole, little peg hole was created there. Here comes now the microscopic needle, the little glass capillary that I told you about, single cell capillary glass, all with very high sterile conditions, of course. What's inside? What's little balls here? What are these?
Inside of the human.
The human,
cell.
yeah, look at this.
The human stem cells.
Yeah, that's right, the human iPS. Okay, check it out. Look at the level of resolution. This is a photograph. You can tell it's a photograph. Look at that. You can see the nuclei of those iPS. There's a nucleus there. There's a nucleus. Maybe this dark area. All right. But there they come.
So all of those are single IPS.
These are single, yes, these are single human iPS, which are pluripotent. They're not embryos as such. They're cells. So far ethically, so good. But then what happens? They've been introduced into a non-human. Big ethical issue. Who has the right to do that? Now we're introducing iPS cells in here that have, because they're pluripotent, they have the capacity to generate any organ of the body, of the human body, inside a pig. And here is the actual photograph of this, which was done, started in the United States. Part of the technique was done in the United States. This part was done in the United States at the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California. And then these cells were cryopreserved and sent to Spain, into matadores, in some large pig farms that they have in Spain. The Spanish pigs are very well known for their taste. And here is the actual piglet that was chimerized with human cells.
You have pictures of the pig, like adults?
Okay, so let's follow this scenario. These are actual photographs of the article, and I give you the, I think I give you the site of the article here. Yeah, you can go here and actually read the, read. It was done because the second part is forbidden in the US with federal money, okay? Only with federal money, because the NIH is the one that controls, and the NIH tried to relax this ban that we have at the federal level. They tried to do that around September, October of last year, just before the presidential election. At any rate, this little piglet has a heart, as you can see here, has its tail and so forth, and it's forming. And this little piglet is not really shown here because we would have to do a tissue analysis. But this little piglet has integrated human cells into it, all right? Has integrated human cells into its tissues in various parts of the body, just like it's indicated here in the diagram.
So far, after the great extinction, the next great extinction, and
yes,
human beings are no more.
yes,
They go and have pig beings.
right, the pig beans. Yeah. Remember the island of Dr. Moreau? Okay. So this is what the diagram is showing, these little patches Okay, that's the chimerism. Those would be the human cells growing there, human tissues. They're putting it here in a little mild, benevolent way. Keep in mind that these IPS, these human IPS, are pluripotent. So they can generate any organ or tissue of the body. What if they generate a liver? Okay, so it's a liver, it's a human liver. Maybe this pig can grow a human liver, and that human liver can be used for the patient who donated the cells because her liver went bad. Or maybe the pig generates a heart. But what if if the cells integrate into the pig brain? Now we have a human pig brain.
Because in theory, we don't know which one of these, what's the
And they
identity
control
of these.
what-
Exactly, it's gunshot. Here's a gunshot. Okay, there is a gunshot. So any one of these cells can integrate into the ICM anywhere, and it could be on the ectoderm, it could be on the mesoderm, it could be under the endoderm. If it integrates into the ectoderm, what about the invagination and the neural tube and so forth? That's part of the nervous system. And so the point is that some of these human cells can integrate into the pig brain. Alternatively, some of them can integrate into the gonads, and then you would have human pig ovaries or human pig testes, which would then produce gametes that are chimeric gametes, and then it would be passed on to the next generation, potentially. The ones who do survive and have integrated, good. And so you see the bioethical issues right away. Who has a right to go there, to go so far that much? You know, to generate a partial human brain or substantial human brain in a non-human embryo. Of course, or the gonads, because, and what's further is that NIH tried to do this because currently, like I say, there's a ban in the United States. Remember NIH and NSF, right? NIH is the funding agency in the United States for medical research, for clinical research in the human. NSF is the equivalent for non-human. It's a funding agency for research in the United States for either basic research in nature or non-human, right? So those are the two big branches at the federal level. Their budget is not in the millions, their budget is in the billions annually. Like I looked it up, NIH last year was around $13 billion annual budget. Federal, therefore, our tax money, the people's money, okay? People's money. So there are bans, there are restrictions on what the labs of the United States can do with that money. And right now there is a ban on doing this in the United States with federal money, with the people's money, okay? So there's no ban at the state level with state money unless that particular state restricts it. And there's certainly no ban on private money for foundations and so forth. The stakes are high, but that's the whole thing with biotechs. I understand less than zero about finances, but biotechs, they're out in the market, okay, and they have shares and whatnot, and they play the market. And so it's a typical high risk share with a potential for high return. So they're high risk because you're pumping $1 million into this, and if it doesn't work, you lost $1 million. But if it does work, guess what? You just cured diabetes or something, because now you're generating a human pancreas inside a pig, and you can grow the pigs by the hundreds. And you just hit that stock went 100-fold or 1,000-fold, and with 1 million investment, you made 1,000 million. Okay, so the biotech shares in the market are high risk with potential for high return, but small percentage. So most of the times they're lost. So any little increment in the techniques that pushes toward an eventual success means a lot. They right away they shoot through the roof. Those stocks shoot through the roofs in the market. Okay, so there's a lot of high risk investment that goes into this by corporations and just diversified portfolios. At any rate, like I say, you can follow the article here. Salk Institute in La Jolla did this part, then send them over to Spain, and Spain finished the job here. And then what happened to this pig? So the question, Adriana, what happened to this pig eventually? Thanks be to God, this pig was not actually implanted, was grown to a certain stage, and then they're killed. Why? Because they're useless. In other words, it's called proof of principle. prove, what did they want to prove? They want to prove the principle that this can be done in the lab. They were successful. The rest is minor. The rest is just implanting this chimeric pig in here. And actually, it may have been implanted because it grew to a certain size, certainly beyond the gastral, to the actual embryo level, maybe in fetal level, I don't know. But they were not brought to term, okay? The point is that this is the important part, biologically speaking, that it can be done, that some of the cells integrated. Once they have proved this, then the rest is just normal gestation, really. All right? And so for now, these pigs were killed so that more ethical issues were not raised. They don't even know, it's a gut-shot thing, so they don't even know where those human cells integrated, and they don't want to find out. So they wouldn't get shut down. Because if they did integrate it to the brain, then now effectively we have a human pig brain. Okay, and who has the right to do that? So they just wanted to prove the principle, which has been done. All right, and there again is the reference. When you have insomnia at night, you can read that, and it will guarantee to keep you up for the rest of the night.
Yeah. So it's the human stem cells and the pig stem cells are mixed together
Yes,
in blastocysts of the pig.
correct. Yeah.
So they don't destroy the pig stem cells at all.
Exactly. They're trying to maintain integrity of the blastocyst. The pig blastocyst has to maintain. That's why this little perforation here is very crucial. But you know, you're talking about pig blastocyst. So if this one didn't work, next. It's just a question of hyperovulating pigs and generating their blastocysts.
And I guess the idea would be to grow human organs that are
Yes.
biologically similar to someone else.
Exactly. They would have this DNA, these organs would have the DNA of the donor human who happens to have a disease, let's say some terminal cancer of the heart, of the liver, of the pancreas, or, you know, and that organ would be grown and then
Exactly.
replaced.
I wonder if the pig would live though, like be successful, be alive,
Good question.
or if the pig cells would take over and mess
Right.
up the heart.
Yeah, exactly. So you have immune issues, you have compatibility
Right.
issues and so forth, but the fact that they have integrated means that at least some are immunocompatible and are living through. So it's a trial and error thing, right? But they just want to prove the principle. And they're using the pig because some of the organs of the pig are fairly similar to the human, even in size. The classical one, of course, is the heart, to the point that pig heart valves are used to replace human heart valves, right?
Been doing that for a while.
Yeah, that's been on for decades now,
Yeah.
actually. The pig heart valves. The pig heart is about the same size as the human and so forth. Very, very similar
Is that
anatomically.
ethical? Is that ethical?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as the pig is killed humanely.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Because life for life.
Yeah.
You have the potential of saving the life of a human. The foreseeable undesirable consequence is that the pig is going to die. But you know, we can also recycle that pig into something that's edible. So the pig is going to die anyway in the slaughterhouse. We can use the heart.
Why would he kill the pig humanely if it's not human?
Well, because otherwise it's torturing the pig, which is not correct. So there's, in other words, there are protocols for killing animals also that are humane. They can be killed, but they have to be killed humanely and for a reason, not just to torture them. Okay, these are protocols that exist even in the slaughterhouses and so forth. Okay, but they are protocols. In fact, I'm telling you, the protocol for having labs, for having mice in a lab, is an elaborate protocol. And if that protocol is not followed, the whole lab can be shut down, the whole building can be shut down by regulatory agencies because they didn't follow the protocol. Well, they didn't take out the father in time, and the father started eating the baby mice.
But isn't it seen as torturing the mice?
Is seen as?
When, like, doing those, like, tests on the animals isn't somehow...
It's not actual torture. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the protocol, animal protocols in the lab. It's incremental, meaning that the very first stage is probably going to be done with bacteria. to ensure that the DNA is transferred correctly and so forth, or to insert particular genes into bacteria DNA and so forth. So that's the first level, will be done with bacteria. And then the next level will be done maybe with fruit flies. I don't know, just thinking out loud here, that the animals that are used are, by the time you get to a mammalian model, like the mouse or the rabbit, okay, which are the two typical mammalian models that are used in labs, already a lot of screening has been done and tweaked so that you can only achieve the results by using a mammalian model. In other words, anything else that had to be resolved, any other technical issue or biological information that could be resolved by using non-mammals, then the protocol calls for doing that. Like I say, either the other typical ones are bacteria or fish, like for example, the zebrafish, which is an aquarium fish, okay, is used also a lot as a model, as a lab model, experimental model. So by the time you get to mammals, using mammals, this experiment that I have to use a mammal, typically a mouse or a rabbit, I can only get it, or a rat, I can only get it from a mammal. I need a mammal because the experiment has been tweaked already where I don't get the right information. It has to be a system, a mammalian system, because we're mammals. So that's the first level in the mammalian system. The next level, when it involves human and it's a clinical, it's going to lead toward a clinical trial that could potentially heal a significant disease like, let's say, diabetes or heart failure or something like that. They may use a primate, a chimpanzee, or, well, not a chimpanzee necessarily, but maybe the rhesus monkey or some other monkey, because that's a primate that is very similar, much more similar to the human, okay? And those protocols are extremely rigorous and restrictive, that the result, the lab actually has to prove that there's no other possible way of getting a result, that because the next stage after the primate is going to go to a human, what is called a clinical trial, okay? And we want to be as safe as possible, that there would be no technical errors when we go into a clinical trial, because now we're talking about real human beings. And therefore, for that reason, and of course, the experiment, the results that they're seeking have to be very promising, very significant to cure. The big thing now is different kinds of cancers, depending on the organ that it is, okay? So that's how it's done. But at every step, those animals, when they're euthanized, where they are sacrificed, it has to be done humanely. You typically put them to sleep first, or you sever the spine quickly so that there's no pain involved and so forth. Okay, yeah. Okay, but again, the justification, and it has to be justified with background evidence and all, and peer review articles, that this is the only way that we can get this result that has promise for a clinical trial, for a clinical cure, for a human cure. All right? In contrast to this is growing some organs in the human, in animals. This is a nude mouse. This is the Vacanti mouse. Okay. And now what do we have? This is a live mouse. It's called a nude mouse. Nude mouse because it's denuded of hair. Actually, it's a side effect of being immunocompromised. These mice, they're transgenic mice. In other words, they're manipulated. All these mice are grown in the lab, first of all. Okay, so they're not running around the wild. They wouldn't survive in the wild. They're grown in the lab, and they're grown for particular purposes. Sometimes with transgenics is that they have particular genetic information that is necessary for the experiment. So what do we have here? We have this little mouse that has been immunocompromised. The immune system has been essentially shut down. One of the side effects is that they lose their hair. There are also, in addition to that, this one in particular is albino, because one can tell a little bit that the eye is reddish, okay? And they lose essentially the hair, but you can see they still keep some hair, like they have a few eyelashes here, and they have some hair around the nose, okay? But they're alive, and as long as you keep them kind of in a sterile condition, because they have no immune system or very minor immune system, they can be alive and thrive and mate and produce more like their own. The further thing is that this Dr. Vacanti, he in the 90s, he experimented with growing an ear, but this is not really an ear, it's an ear lobe, okay? It's the ear, it's the outside of the ear. There's no internal organ here, all right? It's just, he essentially generated in the lab, he manufactured a scaffolding of an ear. In other words, the structure, the cartilage structure of the ear, you know that the ear is cartilage, right? Just like the tip of the nose. And it's a kind of a bone tissue that has not calcified with bone, so it doesn't become hard. And it's the scaffolding, is the understructure, the infrastructure for the ear flap, all right? And then what the ear needs aside from that, the ear flap, is just to grow skin over it. So he inserted surgically that structure underneath the skin of the mouse, the nude mouse. And why is the mouse nude? Again, think immunocompromised, so that the immune system of the mouse would not reject that transplant, because the mouse has no immune system. Okay, so obviously this is it was done under sterile conditions, so the mouse will not get an infection. But then what the mouse did was just grow skin over that structure that was inserted into underneath his or her skin. Okay. See? And so this doctor managed to grow an ear lobe, an ear flap on this mouse. And for someone who has had a traumatic injury to the ear lobe maybe and has lost his or her ear, this may be a way of growing a new ear for that person. So it could justify it. But keep in mind, this is not, there's nothing internal here, okay? The internal organs, which is really what makes the person hear, is not here. And so we have to be clear what's going on actually. So this Vacanti mouse is just the ear flap itself. But it happened in the 90s, and there it is. And this could be bioethically justified for the proper reason. It doesn't significantly harm the mouse. The little mouse can continue to live and thrive and mate and so forth. Of course, this earlobe, would this ear flap be passed on to the next generation of mice? Let's say this is a male mouse. Will he pass on this ear with his children? Will his progeny grow an ear? No, because this is an acquired characteristic, right? It's not inherited, it's not in its genes. What if it were the female? If this was a female mouse? No, the same thing. You know, it's acquired. It's not. It's an extra part to the body, but it's not integrated into the genetic material. By surgery, probably did it at the embryonic stage, or maybe not. Maybe when the little mouse was just born, tender, young. Essentially, this just points out to the stem cells of the mouse. The adult stem cells of the mouse had a lot of regenerative power and just grew over the structure in a confluent way, and even vascularized. You can see it's semi-transparent here, so you can see the vascularization. You can see the ramification of blood vessels there, right? Feeding the skin of the mouse that is growing over this structure. So it's the beginning of growing an human organ in an animal, but potentially ethical.
But this is still not right.
Well,
You took the stem cells of the human and induced them to become earlobe stem cells?
no.
Oh.
No. The only stem cells involved here are the mouse stem cells, okay, which are adult stem cells because the mouse is already born. And what he introduced, what Dr. Vacanti introduced underneath the skin of this mouse is just the structure of the ear, like the I don't even know if this is an actual human structure or similar to a human structure. You know, he made the scaffolding the structure, like if you would take a human ear and devoid it of skin, just the cartilage. The cartilage that's left, that structural cartilage, is what he inserted underneath the skin surgically and then sewed it up again. I don't know, maybe this is the surgical
like
scar, I
graphene,
have no
Bob.
idea. This could be the
But
surgical
it's still
scar.
like graphing when you like the graft.
It's a graft, it's exactly, it's a graft.
It's a graft.
It is a graft, okay?
But it takes on its own self because the skin of the mouse
Yes,
always it.
it is the skin of the mouse.
Yeah.
So that would present problem. Well, maybe not, because this is immuno.
Still-
So will if this was replanted onto a human, there would be immunological issues there, because these are the mouse cells. And this is a human
it's-
body, so there may be rejection there, so that would have to be dealt with. Okay, so just, but to prove that there is other research that is going on in the area of growing organs and tissues, human organs and tissues in animals, lab animals, that could be ethically justified. Could be. Now, and here I want to, if I was narrowing your mind in the earlier issues of chimerism, if I was narrowing your mind from a liberal mentality to a more orthodox mentality of bioethical rigor, all right, with this one I want to do the converse. I want to expand your mind into the ethical possibilities, because the key with bioethics, so that we don't become irrelevant, is that we allow the maximum latitude possible to clinical research that is ethically responsible, okay? But we don't want to inhibit clinical research or animal research unnecessarily. So we want to allow the maximum possible research that is ethically responsible. Otherwise, if it's going to be always no, 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 we just lose credibility. We become irrelevant. We become naysayers, and we become fundamentalists. You know, it's not the Bible, therefore ditch it out. Ouch. So we want to be as open-minded as possible, as long as it's ethically responsible. All right? There are no human embryonic stem cells involved here. And that's a big plus for this kind of protocol, because we're not talking about compromising human embryos. You know, it's a particular organ or system. The one that we would have a quandary, the two human organs that we would really have a challenge justifying, would be to try to generate a substantially human brain in an animal, or substantially human gonads, substantially human eggs or ovaries or testes in an animal. Now, with regards to the testes, frankly, you know, we have to be realistic also. Realistically, the testes is not that big a deal anytime soon that labs in the world are going to try to grow human testes in an animal, because sperm is cheap. You can get it by the millions of millions. Sadly, but true, it's out there. Just go to a clinic, to an in vitro clinic, and it's a catalog. However, human eggs, that's the challenge. Because it still involves hyperopulation of the woman and the risk of her health and so forth, eggs translate in the market into being expensive, to the tune of thousands and thousands of dollars. Therefore, you can see that there's an economic incentive with a utilitarian mentality to grow human ovaries in an animal, because then we could have an essentially unlimited source of human eggs without bothering the woman. Okay? And that's a big danger, because that's going to go high on the market. Because now, all of a sudden, you could pump out into the market a product that is highly priced to the thousands of dollars. You could offer it at half price, 1/10 of a price, and you wiped out the other market. You know, you get the corner on that market just by eventually growing ovaries, human ovaries, in a mouse, a rat, a pig. Most likely, the pig is the most likely candidate. Yeah. So that's our society today. Those are the sources that I've given to you. It's in the literature, okay? And that's why bioethics continues to be a relevant discipline. If we could only present the arguments of credibility. We should not go in certain areas, and if I can land it eventually into eugenics, which is somehow purifying the race, then I touch on a nerve, because eugenics was tried and condemned half a century ago. It led to a Second World War, and the Nuremberg trials talk about eugenics and so forth. So just try to present the arguments without saying the word first, and then at the end of the day, functionally, we're describing the same thing as eugenics. Only that is done with very strict protocols, microscopically, under the highest sterile conditions and so forth. And because it is microscopically, we're not seeing gas chambers of people being put in ovens and so forth. But essentially, we're purifying the race with these techniques. Okay, really? That's all I have. I think it's been sufficient for one day. Therefore, little humility is also important in the lab, right? Know that we are not owners ultimately of our bodies, but we are stewards of our body, which I know it's a theological concept, but we have to make the case for it. Okay, folks. That's all I have for today. So thank you very much. And God willing, we'll see you next Saturday before 9 a.m. over at the gym for the Women's Health Seminar. Okay? All right. Thanks again. Everybody have a great weekend. All right. Gonna stop the recording now so that we can download it.
That was a lot. Even if it's short.
It's a lot in a little, right? A lot in a little
So
time.
if you want again on Wednesday by 12
Let me stop this recording.